This week on To the Contrary.
First, welfare and women. A war on poverty or a war on the poor. Then, ending racial disparities in how girls are disciplined at public schools.
I'm Bonnie Urbay, and welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, the ongoing debate over welfare benefits.
A war on the poor or saving taxpayers' money? That's the question at the heart of the never-ending debate about welfare reform laws. Some proposed, others already on the books. Initiatives are being pushed by Republican lawmakers that bar people on food stamps from using them to buy certain foods or people on cash assistance to use it to go to the movies. Other laws support mandatory drug testing before receiving government benefits. Critics say it's unfair to the poor and only marginalizes them. They say many have stopped signing up for government assistance even when they need it, due to the judgment and shame these laws generate. They also question how much money is really saved.
So, Darlene Kennedy, what's your vision of what the government owes each citizen?
Well, I believe that the government only owes its citizens the opportunity to pursue and achieve the American dream.
I think the government owes you what you pay. You pay more, you should expect more.
Americans are a generous people, and we want to help our neighbors in need, but we also want to know that they're doing what they can to help themselves.
They owe us the tools and the skills to overcome any barriers that deter us from being able to get to the American dream.
Okay, let's start, because I want to go down a list here, and obviously we all know Republicans generally want to pay less in taxes and give less support to people, less welfare, less all kinds of social programs, and Democrats want more. But let's start with enough for a subsistence living in terms of food.
Yes.
Oh, I agree. Yes, of course.
Yes.
Sure, and we do.
Okay, and for children?
Yeah, no,
yes.
And we do.
No doubt.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, without limits. 10 kids, 2 kids?
Oh, well, if you want to get into specifics, that's different.
Right, I want to get into deep specifics here, because I really want
But let's be clear.
I want the audience to understand how people come to their decisions about what the government should do and what it shouldn't do.
Yeah,
so if you have 2 kids, should the government pay to feed those kids? If you have 10 kids?
It depends on the circumstance when it happens. Honestly, for me, I can't say you can't have 10 kids, you can't have 5 kids. But what I will say is if you're reckless and you're not really utilizing the opportunity that you have to have that gap, to bridge your gap to get to the next step, then we need to revisit what you're receiving and how much you get.
Mm-hmm. Deep specifics is what the welfare program needs, because you have
It has limitations
But
on
I
children.
think those limitations are good. Like 2 kids, yes. I think it should be a number that it can't be too many and it can't be too little at the same time.
But we need to specify what the family cap is about in the welfare reform package. And what it is that you come into the program and get assistance with the family that you have. And if you have an additional child, and typically these are to unwed mothers, you're not going to get extra benefits for that child. That's what the family cap is about. And I think that's a principle that makes sense.
So the limit is at 1?
No. It's you're getting assistance for the family that when you come into the program, just not for additional births beyond that.
But what does that mean then? That means that if you have another child, that means that you have to do even more with less. And so what opportunity then are we giving people to get out of poverty? If we're saying, oh, you're in this situation, and so we're not going to help you any more than you have been able to help yourself, even given all of the barriers to that. And I think that if you have 2 kids when you start the program and you have a third, you're supposed to be able to provide for all 3, not just the 2.
The rationale here, though, is to encourage marriage and to encourage that welfare should
Are
not
welfare recipients told that when they sign up for benefits?
That this has been it has not been as effective as the welfare reform movement in the 90s had hoped. But trying to communicate, we should be telling everyone, and particularly at-risk young mothers, that if you have a child outside of marriage, that child is 5 times more likely to experience poverty than if you got married to the father of that child. And many of them want to. This isn't about somebody else imposing their dreams. These are the dreams that young women from low socioeconomic backgrounds tell us they want. So let's figure out what's keeping them from achieving that dream.
But why are we putting so much responsibility on women? You should get married.
Because
what
men generally don't get TANF.
But well, why are the men leaving? Why are they getting the women impregnating and leaving and not staying on to build this family that is supposed to create so much stability in society?
Well, I guess the answer to that is they have sex. You know, and that's
maybe the answer is increased access to family planning.
Right, and the idea too that marriage is a silver bullet, and so that means that if people get married, that if you happen to be in a domestic violence situation, or there happens to be somebody who is a deadbeat of some sort, that we're saying shackle yourself to that person and your life will get better.
Because that's lifelong stability.
But, you know, I don't think any of us at this table want to see anyone not survive in this world. It's just
so that
what
means,
are the
so
parameters?
That means to you, okay, but again, I want to get to the limitations. Should the government pay your rent if you can't afford to pay the rent under any circumstance?
I'm not anti-support, financial support. What I'm
but I want to go down the list of rent.
Yes, paying the rent.
Your rent.
You need a roof over your head.
Okay,
but
does TANF do that?
Public housing does that. Let's be clear about what the welfare state is. The welfare state is 80 federal means-tested programs that provide cash, food, housing, medical assistance, and other social services to the poor and near poor. So we have a vast state. We have all these things. I think what we're saying is you need the incentive structure of that system to help people pursue self-sufficiency, pursue the dreams that they say they want, not lock them into intergenerational dependency.
Okay, now let's go to health care. I mean, with Obamacare, which is not a derisive term, the president uses it himself.
Well,
every American supposedly has access to affordable health care.
I think we can disagree on housing, number of children, food, whatever, but I think health care, it should be non-negotiable. I think everybody needs to have it, because if you don't have your health, you really can't have anything.
Right.
You can't even really work.
You can't work. You can't go to school. You can't take care of your kids.
And healthcare in this country, I think it's been established as out of reach, expensive compared to the rest of the world. We need to change.
I'm not anti. I agree they should have health care. But again, you need to have a cap on this stuff. I mean, I don't know what that cap is. I don't know what the number should be. But I don't. Getting back to incentives. I mean, you want to incentivize people to move forward. So yes, you should have those coverages, the same things that working people have. But at some point, you need to know, okay, I need to work towards being able to sustain myself. Now, sometimes people do work. Welfare doesn't only go to unemployed; it goes to the working poor that can't make ends meet. So we need to look at that as well.
You're right. But
I want your thought on healthcare.
On healthcare, I think there are going to be some people whose labor market value is not going to be enough to afford the insurance products that are out there right now. Partially, those are inflated because the price of those are inflated because of the regulations that came along with Obamacare and so on. So let's do what we can to bring a real marketplace back, and then let's do a better job of serving the poor and near poor by giving them premium support so that they can go out into the private market and buy what suits their needs, not what Medicaid is giving them right now, which is really not doing justice to their needs.
Well, is that not, though, in some way, shape? I mean, there are experts I've talked to who say, okay, you support their premiums, right? That's taxpayers' money. That's taxing not so much the rich because they don't pay. We know the super rich anyway don't pay or use loopholes and get away with it without paying very much. But it's really the upper middle class and the middle class. Is it the obligation in your mind of middle and upper middle class people to pay for things like health care for poor people? Is that an obligation?
I think we have a moral responsibility to make sure that in a country like ours, our neighbors are not falling through the cracks or not suffering in ways that could be alleviated in basic medical care. So that's what we're doing right now.
Does that extend to immigrants? Legal and or illegal?
I think.
I mean, I'm asking about limits.
Our emergency room policy does that right now. So that's what we're saying is we don't want anyone to, have, if there's an emergency situation, they're going to be taken care of in America. That's our
What is the
moral.
role that the government plays in taking care of each of its citizens? I mean, maybe this is a perspective issue, but I just came back from overseas, and I mean, I just came back from a country where the government does nothing. Nothing. And, you know, people are falling through the cracks, over 50%. I mean, they call it a starvation rate, but it's really a poverty index. People are below the starvation line. And the government really doesn't care. So to come back to a country like this where I'm like, really? Do we expect A, B, and Z? Like, wow, we should be really grateful.
We do. we provide a lot. We are providing more than double the amount that it would take to get people out of poverty.
I will say, in comparison to foreign countries, I have visited India and seen what it looks like when you have no FDA, when you have no regulation whatsoever, and see how people fall through the cracks. But we need more specifics, and we need to stop looking at the poor as if they are a problem. And that's the way that we view them. We keep saying that we need to incentivize people to want to get off welfare, the assumption being that they're so happy and content getting welfare, which they aren't. I mean, we have some celebrities that have taken the food stamp challenge, right, which is just problematic in and of itself, but they take this challenge and they can't even last a week on the $29 or $30 that you're supposed to be able to.
Nickeled and dimed by Barbara Ehrenreich, trying to live on a minimum wage and couldn't do it.
And couldn't do it. There's no place that you can actually afford rent in this country on a minimum wage. Not one state.
So the point is, you're not getting only one program of benefit. People are getting cash, food, housing, Medicaid, a whole bundle of goods from the federal government. So I do agree that we should get more specific in our conversation, and we don't always illuminate all these details.
And I want, you know, you raised the issue of why is it always the mothers who are getting these benefits, picked on for being the bad ones, whatever onus you want to add to a woman's burden in having children. But because TANF does mainly go to mothers without children, with children without men in their lives, are these limits sexist? The things about going to the movies or the kind of food you can buy? Because really, in the end, 90% of the people on these benefits are women.
You know, limitations on what you can buy. I don't think you should be buying alcohol with it. But things, you know, if you want to.
So then, if you do that, where do you stop?
Well, I don't know. It just seems common sense. I mean, why shouldn't someone with little kids not be able to take their kids to see Frozen or whatever it is? I mean, you know, yes, you don't want.
Isn't that the Supreme Court's slippery slope?
But let's.
I mean, you know, you allow this, you don't allow that. Where does it end?
But let's be clear. I mean, we look at the surveys of what the typical poor household in America has, and they typically have more than one TV, cable, and a gaming system. So they got that in their home. Let's be clear about the living standards. The war on poverty has been effective in raising material living standards. What it has not been effective at is raising the ability of Americans to achieve self-sufficiency, absent government dependence.
And education, a free public school, elementary, high school, and then, you know, free or very inexpensive state tuition rates.
That's all part of the bargain.
But why in and of itself has that not solved the problem? Because, for example, poor people who came to this country 100 and some odd years ago, there was not a public education system. There were not public universities like there are now. If you get educated, you're not going to end up usually driving a cab for the rest of your life and living on something like minimum wage.
And the system we had 150 years ago was much more localized and delivered, the accountability was a horizontal one, directly from the providers to the parents and the families. Now we have this vertical accountability system where the local school is reporting all the way up the chain of command to Washington, and that's not serving the consumers of that education very well.
Frankly, our education system does not meet the barriers to education that communities, especially low-income communities, are facing, right? Such as healthcare, such as being able to be in a safe environment, walking from your front door to your school building without getting shot, the way that we police, over-police in various schools that are low income. There are so many barriers to education that we don't understand, and we just expect kids to show up and be able to recite their ABCs, but not understand and protect them in all the other ways that would have them be prepared to learn.
All right. Let us know what you think about this. Please follow me on Twitter @BonnieRBay. From government assistance to disparities in discipline.
According to the U.S. Department of Education, African American girls are 6 times more likely to be suspended from school than their white counterparts. Studies such as Black Girls Matter pushed out, over-policed, and underprotected charge that systematic racism faced by African American males each day also affects girls of color. Noting that harsher treatment leads to negative outcomes, researchers pointed out these girls are generally not included in programs designed to keep them in school and out of prison.
Girls actually suffer a heavier burden of racial disparity than even boys do. So one of the things it points us to think about is what are the ways that Black girls in particular are made more vulnerable to discipline, more vulnerable to suspension, more vulnerable to expulsion, and then how are those factors shaping some of the more negative outcomes that we see many Black women facing in society.
Studies have also found the darker a student's skin, the more likely she is to be penalized at harsher and higher rates than fairer-skinned or white schoolmates for the same offense. The reason? Unclear. In 2014, for example, 2 students were suspended for vandalizing school property. One white student paid restitution to avoid severe punishment. The other student, a Black middle schooler who was unable to pay, faced a disciplinary hearing and trespassing misdemeanor charges.
If your family can find the resources to pay a fine or in some other way find a diversionary kind of intervention, a childhood prank won't end up being so life-altering. But because our children are disproportionately poor, because they might not have the same kind of access to counselors, resources, even representation, heavy punitive policies will have a disproportionately negative impact on them.
So Danielle, is there a cultural issue going on here? Like if a young African American girl is identified by a white school administrator as being defiant or having a bad attitude, is that maybe a cultural gap that the administrator doesn't understand?
There's absolutely a cultural gap that we're seeing. There's a racialized gap, there's a gender gap, and just an overtly cultural gap. And the idea is that if a young Black girl acts out in any type of way and is not being submissive, then she needs to be suspended. And that's exactly what's happening. We expect girls to be demure, to be polite, to be all of these things, and especially put burdens on African American girls as well. And so we're seeing what's happening, and people say, I don't understand what's happening. It's racialized and it's genderized, and how we expect certain people to act.
Well, now, this study, remember, was of zero tolerance schools, so they're already in a situation where they're getting, you know, very strict disciplinary codes.
You know, I have to say, I mean, I can't give Black girls, being a former Black girl, now a woman, I can't give them a pass. I mean, I'm not saying you should be docile and, you know, comatose, but I think, you know, there are rules we have to play by in this society. I mean, when I went to school, you know, you said yes and you said no, you held your hands, you know, you stood on line, you were quiet. I mean, I had no excuse for not doing those things because my parents were going to take care of it when I got home. So I think part of that is, though, maybe there isn't enough support at home to help. You know, they talked, the clip talked about the fact that girls aren't, especially Black girls, aren't able to go into these different types of programs. And I think part of that is they don't have the support system at home necessarily that can get them in those different, you know, programs that would be supportive to them to grow better.
At home, but also, I mean, I think it's undeniable. I mean, racism is real. And I think that what you said is completely right. It's racialized, it's genderized, and I think it's true. I think you're expected to act a certain way, and if you don't, and if you're a person of color, a woman of color, as much as I don't like that term, I think you will get penalized.
Why don't you like that term?
Because it paints us as women of color. That's why. What is that supposed to mean? Am I brownish, grayish? I just think that I just don't like that. It's just like if you're white or you're other. That's what I don't like about it.
No one should face unjust discrimination for their race, and so let's grant that at the beginning. And what problem is there because of that we should root out. There were other things that this report brought about and other things that the report didn't answer. It called for more research, and I think what that more research ought to do is to illuminate what kinds of behaviors we're talking about. The report didn't really tell us how it was evaluating and comparing behaviors. It had a few anecdotes. Our segment here had an anecdote, but it's hard to tell whether the discipline that was reported fit the behavior that was reported. And if we were seeing disproportionate application, that would help us get to the bottom of the problem more.
Yeah, but didn't we, one part of the report, I think in New York City in 2011 to 2012, there were 0 white girls disciplined and 53 girls of color. So what does that statistic say to you?
I need to know the other part of the equation. What was the behavior that on each side? And then was the discipline appropriate to the behavior? That's the piece that's missing, I think, in this report and discussion.
You know, and I don't agree with zero tolerance policies at all. Like, these are kids that we're dealing with, right? School is teenagers. School is supposed to teach you how to be an adult, right? And so the idea that we don't use it...
But this is an important question. Is it supposed to teach you that, or isn't that partly your family's job?
As a former teacher, that is exactly what your education is. That is exactly what school is supposed to do. Absolutely, parents have responsibilities, but in lieu of having parents that are there and with you all of the time and not working 60 hours a week to make minimum wage, to keep a roof over your head, schools are supposed to teach you how to become citizens.
And how often?
But let me, and as a former teacher, is that too big a job to ask? Because some of these kids come in without having been fed breakfast, with an alcoholic parent who's not absent because they're working, absent because they're just absent. And is it too much to ask of teachers to make up for the messes that some people are creating by having families when they're not able to take care of them?
It is a huge burden that teachers bear, and it would behoove us as a society to pay them for the burden that they are actually
I've always said
undertaking.
football players are way overpaid and teachers are way underpaid.
I mean, way underpaid. Exactly. But you make exactly the point that teachers have been saying for the longest time. They are dealing with so much more than let me teach you how to walk in a line straight or let me recite your ABCs. And so we should value them for the job that they are doing, which is to create responsible citizens.
This report got at several other factors, the chaos in the school, chaos at home, chaos in the community. And I think there are things we can do both short-term and long-term to get at those factors. One thing we could do immediately is to allow students to escape an ineffective school, a school where there's lots of violence, and to choose a safe and effective school. That's what happened in the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program. It was parents' complaints about the discipline and the violence at their children's public schools that brought about this opportunity to choose private schools with the Opportunity Scholarship.
Which, and to some extent, I think that is like on its face, that seems like a very good idea. But we're still not getting to the root of the problem, which is the actual community, right? So we're just saying, here, you can go to this school over here, but you're still living over here where the violence is still prevalent. So what about those kids that cannot opt in because it's a lottery system and your education shouldn't be a lottery?
Right.
And I wanted to ask
everyone.
you, with this report and a couple of other similar ones that have come out recently, are we focusing too much on black boys' problems and not enough on black girls? I mean, the president did the initiative with Save Our Black Boys.
I think, to Jennifer's point, we need more research across the board. I don't think that we're focusing on one group more than the other. I think that both need equal attention. And I think that it's very important that we get the equal attention that is necessary, because there isn't just one group over here, black boys, oh, everything is terrible, which makes the assumption that for black girls everything is fantastic, which we're seeing is not the case.
But why does it kind of come out that way? Why is there a movement to help black boys and then there's a movement to help? Why isn't it just all poor people or all underserved people?
I think this is what we happen.
No, I was just going to respond because one of the clips talked about the two girls that put graffiti on the wall and the white girl got off because she could pay the $100. To me, I don't look at it as a race issue. I look at it as a socioeconomic issue. If the African American's child parents or grandparents had the money, she would be able to not serve those penalties. So, I don't always think it's always about color. It's also about economics.
But
that's a big
race
issue.
Play into economics? I mean,
look, I grew up in the South Bronx in the projects, so working poor parent. So, I mean, it's not always about, about race. I mean, they sent me out to school and said, if you want to do better, these are the things you have to do. Was it easy? No. Did I have to walk over somebody who was, drunk or what have you? Yeah, I did. But, the fact of the matter is I had that opportunity, and my parents supported me in having that opportunity. And it didn't matter what, my parents always said, it doesn't matter what color you are. It matters how hard you work.
That's true, and I agree with that. But that project that we have seen recently, which was What I Wish My Teacher Knew. What my teacher knew, what I wish my teacher knew. And this teacher asked her students, her elementary school students, to tell her what they wish she knew about their home life. And some kids were like, I wish my teacher knew that, I don't always have a pencil at home, or I wish my teacher knew that my parents don't always sign my homework because my mom's never around, or these things. So I think teachers do take on an added responsibility. We need to respect them more. We need to pay them more. But sometimes I feel like what you're not getting at home, hopefully you're getting at school. How often do we judge someone by their behavior by saying, well, they're so well educated? You can tell her education, or she's so uneducated because of A, B, and C. So it matters. It matters.
It matters, and you can't. And socioeconomics is not devoid of racism and gendering, right? When we have conversations about how women are not equally paid, well, when we look at that, when you start to break it down by race, you find that black women are only paid 50 cents. So on the dollar.
And that is so true and so sad. That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.